Tree Grows in Brooklyn, Chapter 34. When Francie heard Aunt Sissy tell Mama that she was going to get a baby, she wondered why Aunt Sissy didn't say have a baby, like other women said. She found out there was a reason why Sissy said get instead of have. Sissy had had 3 husbands. There were 10 tiny headstones in a small plot in St. John's Cemetery in Cypress Hills belonging to Sissy. And on each stone, the date of the death was the same as the date of the birth. Sissy was 35 now and desperate about not having children. Katie and Johnny often talked it over, and Katie was afraid that Sissy would kidnap a child someday. Sissy wanted to adopt a child, but her John wouldn't hear of it. "I'll not support another man's bastard, see?" was his way of putting it. "Don't you like children, lover?" she asked wheedlingly. "Sure I like children, but they gotta be my own and not some other bum's," he answered, unintentionally insulting himself. In most things, her John was like soft dough in Sissy's hands, but in this one thing, he refused to allow himself to be needed her way. If there was to be a child, he kept insisting, it would have to be his and no other man's. Sissy knew he meant it. She even had a kind of respect for his attitude, but she had to have a living baby. By chance, Sissy found out that a beautiful 16-year-old girl out in Maspeth had gotten into trouble with a married man and was going to have a baby. Her parents, Sicilians lately come over from the other side, had shut up the girl in a dark room so that the neighbors could not see her shame increase. Her father kept her on a diet of only bread and water. He had a theory that this would weaken her so that she and her child would die in childbirth. Lest the kind-hearted mother feed Lucia during his absence, the father left no money in the house when he went to work in the mornings. He brought a bag full of groceries each night when he returned home and watched that no food was sneaked out and set aside for the girl. After the family had eaten, he gave the girl her daily ration of a half a loaf of bread and a jug of water. Sissy was shocked when she heard this story of starvation and cruelty. She thought out a plan. Feeling as they did, she thought the family might be glad to give away the baby when it was born. She decided to have a look at the people. If they seemed normal and healthy, she'd offer to take the baby. The mother wouldn't let her into the house when she called. Sissy came back the next day with a badge pinned to her coat. She knocked on the door. When it was opened a crack, she pointed to the badge and sternly demanded admittance. The frightened mother, thinking Sissy was from the immigration department, let her in. The mother could not read, else she would have seen that the badge said Chicken Inspector. Sissy took charge. The mother-to-be was frightened and defiant and also very thin from the starvation diet. Sissy threatened the girl's mother with arrest if she didn't treat the girl better. With many tears and in a badly broken English, the mother told of the disgrace and of the father's plan to starve the girl and the unborn child to death. It was mostly in pantomime. At last, Sissy made it understood that she was willing to take the child off their hands as soon as it was born. When the mother understood finally, she covered Sissy's hand with grateful kisses. From that day, Sissy became the adored and trusted friend of the family. After her John left for work in the morning, Sissy cleaned up the flat, cooked a pot full of food for Lucia, and took it over to the Italian home. She fed Lucia well on a combination of Irish-German diet. She had a theory that if the child absorbed such food before birth, it wouldn't be so much of an Italian. Sissy took good care of Lucia. On nice days, she took her out to the park and made her sit in the sun. During the time of their unusual relationship, Sissy was a devoted friend and a gay companion to the girl. Lucia adored Sissy, who was the only one in this new world who had treated her kindly. The whole family, except the father who didn't know of her existence, loved Sissy. The mother and the other children gladly entered into a conspiracy to keep the father in ignorance. They locked Lucia up in her dark room again when they heard the father's steps on the stairs. The family couldn't speak much English, and Sissy knew no Italian, but as the months passed, they learned some English from her and she learned Italian from them, and they were able to talk together. Sissy never told her name, so they called her Stach Libti, after the lady with the torch, which had been the first thing they saw of America. Sissy took over Lucia, her unborn child, and the family. When everything was settled and agreed upon, Sissy announced to her friends and family that she was starting another baby. No one paid any attention. Sissy was always starting babies. She found an obscure midwife and paid her in advance for the delivery. She gave her a paper on which she asked Katie to write her name, her John's name, and Sissy's maiden name. She told the midwife that the paper was to be turned over to the Board of Health immediately after the birth. The ignorant woman, who could not speak Italian, Sissy had made sure of that when she hired her, assumed that the names handed her were the names of the mother and father. Sissy wanted the birth certificate to be in order. Sissy was so realistic about her pregnancy by proxy that she simulated morning sickness in the beginning weeks. When Lucia announced that she felt life, Sissy told her husband that she felt life. On the afternoon that Lucia's labor pain started, Sissy went home and got into bed. When her John came home from work, she told him that the baby was starting to come. He looked at her. She was as trim as a ballet dancer. He argued, but she was so insistent that he went and got her mother. Mary Romilly looked at Sissy and said she couldn't possibly be having a baby. For answer, Sissy let out a blood-curdling yell and said that her pains were killing her. Mary looked at her thoughtfully. She didn't know what Sissy had in mind, but she did know it was useless to argue with her. If Sissy said she was going to have a baby, she was going to have a baby, and that's all there was to it. Her John protested. But look how skinny she is. There's no baby in that belly, see? Maybe it will come from her head. That's big enough as one may see, said Mary Romilly. "Ah, there don't give such things," said the John. "Who are you to say?" demanded Sissy. "Didn't the Virgin Mary herself get a baby without a man? If she could do it, I'm sure I could do it easier, being I'm married and I have a man." "Who knows?" asked Mary. She turned to the harassed husband and spoke gently. "There are a lot of things that men don't understand about." She urged the confused man to forget the whole thing, eat a nice supper which she would cook for him, and then go to bed and get a good night's sleep. The puzzled man lay beside his wife throughout the night. He couldn't get a good night's sleep. From time to time, he'd rise on his elbow and stare at her. From time to time, he'd run his hand over her flat stomach. Sissy slept soundly all through the night. When he left her for work the next morning, Sissy announced that he'd be a father before he returned that night. "I give up!" shouted the tormented man and went off to his work in the pulp magazine house. Sissy rushed over to Lucia's house. The baby had been born just an hour after the father had left. It was a beautiful, healthy girl. Sissy was so happy, she said Lucia would have to nurse the baby for 10 days to give it a start, then she'd take it home. She went out and bought a roasting chicken and a bakery store pie. The mother cooked the chicken Italian style. Sissy trusted a bottle of Chianti wine from the Italian grocer on the block, and they all had a fine dinner. It was like a fiesta in the house. Everybody was happy. Lucia's stomach was almost flat again. There was no longer any monument to her disgrace. Now all was as it had been before, or would be when Sissy took the baby away. Sissy washed the baby every hour. She changed its shirt and band 3 times during the day. The diapers were changed every 5 minutes, whether they needed to be or not. She washed Lucia and made her clean and sweet. She brushed and brushed her hair until it glowed like satin. She couldn't do enough for Lucia and the baby. She had to tear herself away when it came time for the father's returning. The father came home and went into the dark room to give Lucia her daily food pittance. He turned up the gas and found a radiant Lucia and a fat, healthy baby sleeping contentedly at her side. He was amazed. All this on bread and water? Then fright grew on him. It was a miracle. Surely the Virgin Mary had intervened for the young mother. She had been known to work such miracles in Italy. Maybe he would be punished for treating his flesh and blood so inhumanely. Contrite, he brought her a plate heaped with spaghetti. Lucia declined it, saying that she had grown used to bread and water. The mother sided with Lucia and explained that the bread and water had formed the perfect baby. More and more the father believed a miracle had come about. Frantically he tried to be nice to Lucia, but the family were punishing him. They wouldn't permit him to show any kindness to his daughter. Sissy was lying peacefully in bed when her John came home that evening. Jokingly, he asked, "Did you have that baby today?" "Yes," she said in a weak voice. "Aw, go on. It was born an hour after you left this morning." "It was not. I swear." He looked around the room. "Where is it then?" "In the incubator at Coney Island." "In the where?" "It was a 7 months baby, you know. Only weighed 3 pounds. That's why I didn't show." "You lie, see? As soon as I get my strength back, I'll take you to Coney Island, right to the glass case where it is." "What are you trying to do? Drive me crazy?" "I'm going to bring it home in 10 days, just as soon as it grows fingernails." She put that in on the spur of the moment. "What's gotten into you, Sissy? You know goddamn well you didn't have a baby this morning." "I had a baby. It weighed 3 pounds. They took it to the incubator so it wouldn't die, and I'm going to get it back in 10 days. "I give up. I give up," he shouted and went out and got drunk. Sissy brought the baby home 10 days later. It was a big baby, weighed almost 11 pounds. Her John asserted himself for the last time. "It seems mighty big for a 10-day-old baby." "You're a mighty big man yourself, lover," she whispered. She saw a pleased look come into his face. She put her arms around him. "I'm all right now," she said in his ear, "if you want to sleep with me." "You know," he said afterwards, "it does look a little like me." "Especially around the ears," murmured Sissy drowsily. The Italian family went back to Italy a few months later. They were glad to go because the new world had brought them nothing but sorrow, poverty, and shame. Sissy never heard of them again. Everybody knew that it wasn't Sissy's baby, that it couldn't be her baby. But she stuck to her story, and since there was no other explanation, people had to accept it. After all, strange things did happen in the world. They christened the child Sarah, but in time, everyone called it Little Sissy. Katie was the only one to whom Sissy told the truth about the origin of the baby. She confided in her when she asked her to write out the names for the birth certificate. But Francie knew too. Often in the night she had been wakened by the sound of voices and heard Mama and Aunt Sissy talking in the kitchen about the baby. Francie vowed always to keep Sissy's secret. Johnny was the only other person, outside the Italian family, who knew. Katie told him. Francie heard them talking about it when they thought she was sound asleep. Papa took the part of Sissy's husband. "That's a dirty trick to play on a man, any man. Somebody ought to tell him. I'll tell him." "No," said Mama sharply. "He's a happy man. Let him be that way." "Happy? With another man's child palmed off on him? I don't see it." "He's crazy for Sissy. He's always afraid she's going to leave him, and he'd die if she left him. And you know Sissy, she went from one man to another, one husband to another, always trying to get a child. She was on the verge of leaving this one when the baby happened along. Sissy will be a different woman from now on, mark my words. She'll settle down at last and make him a much better wife than he deserves to have." "Who is this John, anyhow?" she interrupted herself. "She'll be a good mother. The child will be her whole world, and she won't need to be going after the men anymore. So don't monkey around with it, Johnny." "You Romilly women are too deep for us men," decided Johnny. A thought struck him. "Say, you didn't do that to me, did you?" In answer, Katie got the children out of bed. She had them stand before him in their long white nightgowns. "Look at them," she commanded. Johnny looked at his son. It was as if he were looking in a trick mirror where he saw himself perfectly but on a smaller scale. He looked at Francie. There was Katie's face all over again, only more solemn. Except for the eyes, they were Johnny's eyes. On an impulse, Francie picked up a plate and held it over her heart the way Johnny held his hat when he sang. She sang one of his songs. "They called her Frivolous Sal, a peculiar sort of gal." She had Johnny's expressions and gestures. I know, Papa whispered. He kissed his children, gave them each a pat on the backside, and told them to go back to bed. After they had gone, Katie pulled Johnny's head down and whispered something to him. "No," he said in a surprised voice. "Yes, Johnny," she said quietly. He put his hat on. "Where are you going, Johnny?" "Out." "Johnny, please don't come home." She looked towards the bedroom door. "I won't, Katie," he promised. He kissed her gently and went out. Francie woke up in the middle of the night, wondering what had taken her out of her sleep. Papa hadn't come home yet. That was it. She never slept soundly until she knew he had come home. Once awake, she started thinking. She thought of Sissy's baby. She thought of the birth. Her thought went to birth's corollary, death. She didn't want to think of death, how everybody was born but to die. While she was fighting off thoughts of death, she heard Papa coming up the stairs singing softly. She shivered when she heard that he was singing the last verse of Molly Malone. He never sang that verse. Never. Why? She died of a fever, and no one could save her. And that's how I lost my sweet Molly Malone. Francie didn't stir. It was a rule that when Papa came home late, Mama was to open the door. She didn't want the children to lose their sleep. The song was coming to an end. Mama didn't hear. She wasn't getting up. Francie jumped out of bed. The song was ended before she reached the door. When she opened it, Papa was standing there quietly, his hat in his hand. He was looking straight before him over her head. "You won, Papa," she said. "Did I?" he asked. He walked into the room, not looking at her. "You finished the song." "Yes, I finished the song, I guess." He sat in the chair by the window. "Papa, turn out the light and go back to bed." The light was kept burning low against his return. She turned out the light. "Papa, are you sick?" "No, I'm not drunk," he said clearly from the dark, and Francie knew that he spoke the truth. She went to bed and buried her face in the pillow. She did not know why, but she wept.